Thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation today. In this presentation, we will be talking about how different gaming media, specifically board games and smartphone applications, can impact the pedagogical orientation of EFL lessons utilizing game-based learning curricula. To start off, we will first take a look at why game-based learning is a beneficial pedagogical tool that can be used in EFL contexts. More specifically, we will look at how game-based learning fits into task-based language teaching. Second, we will address the importance of not only game selection, but also of media selection to best suit the type of EFL course into which a game-based learning curriculum is implemented. It goes without saying that there is no silver bullet game for optimal learning in EFL contexts. Game types and genres are as varied as the skills required for achieving proficiency in the English language itself, and certain games are better suited for fostering certain skills than others. The medium with which the game is played, too, can drastically alter the gaming experience as well as the EFL skills that are fostered through these experiences. So much so that players may utilize entirely different strategies for the same game depending on the medium of gameplay. Third, we will take a look at specific examples of the types of EFL skills fostered by playing the same game with two different media in university level EFL courses in Japan. The game that was utilized in this study is Klaus Teuber's classic strategy board game, The Settlers of Catan. After taking a look at the potential pedagogical benefit of utilizing Catan in business English contexts, we will then look at some of the differences between these two media as observed from one full academic year of integrating both the classic board game edition and the smartphone edition of Catan into EFL curricula. Finally, we will conclude with a brief discussion of how EFL educators who utilize game-based teaching may use these observations to leverage the pedagogical potential of both media types by looking at the strengths of board games versus the strengths of smartphone applications, as was observed in this study. Game-based learning is probably something we have all had experience with in a number of subjects. For those Americans in the audience, at least those who grew up just as computer labs in elementary schools started to become commonplace, many may have fond memories of digitally simulating their way through a social studies lesson in the Oregon Trail, or through a geography lesson with Carmen Sandiego. Since the introduction of these games into the American elementary school system, however, little progress has been made into evolving the process of integrating games into institutionalized education. This has not stopped researchers working in the field of game-based learning, like Kurt Squire, from using off-the-shelf commercial games like Sid Meier's Civilization to engage students in academic discourse. For me, despite being a little more than biased as someone who loves playing games, I have quite vivid memories of those game experiences, even though the last time I logged on to those games was well over 2 decades ago. Now, as an educator in the field of EFL, I have the same opportunity to provide my students with the same type of meaningful interactions. But is there any evidence that game-based learning effectively promotes second language acquisition? Well, yes. Massively multiplayer online role-playing games, for one, benefit language development through peer-to-peer interaction with the context of the game mechanics. They aid in vocabulary acquisition too, through both passive and productive interaction with the target language. The benefits are not limited to the digital realm either. Board games too have been shown to promote spoken interaction in the target language. But the answer is really complex, and there is far from consensus on what a successful game-based learning curriculum looks like. The success of a game-based learning curriculum depends on a lot of factors. For one, the game choice and the pedagogical goals it seeks to accomplish. Media choice for in-class and out-of-class participation. The level of student engagement determining how much effort the students will ultimately put into interacting with the game mechanics. The appropriateness of the game to the level of the students, because the students can't interact with a game that they can't understand how to play. The time devoted to the game in class, in particular, the ratio of class time to game time. And finally, how applicable the game and the framework being used are to the pedagogical goals of the curriculum. Well, if we take a look at the pedagogical goals of EFL education in Japan, as defined by the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology, or MEXT, of fostering communicative skills in the English language by establishing coherent learning achievement targets, then game-based language teaching is particularly well suited to accomplish the goal of increasing communicative skills through its applicability to task-based language teaching methodologies. In particular, the use of task-based language teaching has been identified time and time again as being an educational method that can help achieve the goal of switching the focus of EFL courses from that of form-focused or using more traditional textbook-based grammar-centered lessons to that of being more interaction-focused or using in-class communicative activities to construct meaningful interactions in the target language. TBLT essentially makes use of activities to train students to conduct tasks in the target language. When designing a TBLT curriculum, the instructor will choose a real-world or otherwise reasonably authentic goal to work towards, then create a target task. Then create a series of pedagogic tasks that start as simplified versions of the real-world target task and increase in difficulty. By the end of the curriculum, the students should have developed the linguistic skills to interact with the target goal in English. Game-based language teaching mirrors this process. Take, for example, the game Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. The idea behind the game is to communicate vital information to your partner who is trying to defuse a bomb. This game has objectives that resemble a target goal and makes use of tasks to accomplish this goal. These in-game tasks often get more complex as the game progresses, which again resembles how pedagogic tasks build up to the target tasks. And games often incorporate authentic language use that may simulate or otherwise resemble situations in which authentic target language use takes place. Whereas Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes uses the unrealistic scenario of defusing a bomb, the methods by which it accomplishes this task is not unlike any situation in which you would need to comprehend instructions in English to set up, for example, a new computer. So if we are to accept that game-based learning may have a role to play in effective EFL instruction, the question now becomes what game to play and how best to integrate it into the classroom. Specific genres of games may be conducive to developing certain language skills. Massively multiplayer online role-playing games such as the World of Warcraft have been shown to produce conditions conducive to second language acquisition through the linguistic interactions that occur between players cooperating together on quests. Likewise, cooperation games like Forbidden Island encourage optimal communication between players in order to overcome the gameplay mechanics that are working against them. Information gap games such as Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes not only require students to produce language, but also train specific reading skills like skimming documents for needed information. Social deduction games like One Night Ultimate Werewolf automatically divide students into two groups working against each other, encouraging an environment to develop debate-oriented communication skills and the ability to detect logical fallacies. Even single-player RPG games, like those in the Final Fantasy series, excluding the online titles, are largely text and story-driven, encouraging vocabulary development with natural spacing between vocabulary exposure and gameplay built into the mechanics of the game. If the number of game options available that target specific linguistic skills isn't daunting enough, the choice of game media must also be taken into account. A number of digital games require access to computers and the internet, as well as some requiring subscriptions and their accompanying fees. With other games in more traditional gaming media, be they board games, card games, or otherwise, the number of students in the class plays a decisive role in how feasible some of these games are. For classes with high enrollment numbers, games with limits to the number of possible players will drastically impact not only how the game is implemented into the curriculum, but also the gameplay experience. The game used in this study, The Settlers of Catan, is a strategy board game that can accommodate 2 to 4 players. For courses with more than 4 students, as many of our courses are, the instructor can group students together, which will alter the amount of exposure to the gameplay mechanics each student receives. Incorporate multiple copies of the board game in class, which will alter the amount of teacher intervention possible for each gaming session. Or switch the game medium from the traditional board game to the smartphone application of the game, which will again alter some of the fundamental game tasks. In the next section, we will look at how both of the aforementioned gaming media were implemented into university-level business-oriented EFL courses in Japan, and how each media choice may have influenced each pedagogical outcome. During the spring and fall semesters of 2019, Klaus Teuber's The Settlers of Catan was integrated into 2 business English courses. The game was chosen to investigate the ability of the gameplay mechanics to provide instruction on and encourage the development of strategies for resource management, identifying shifts in market value, and trade negotiation in dynamic environments. The board game edition of Catan was used in a business reading class during the spring semester, and the smartphone edition of Catan was used in a business English class during the fall semester. First, we will address how the board game edition of Catan was integrated into the course curriculum. Then we will discuss some of the instructor observations and specific student reactions to the framework, specifically about what went well and what could be improved upon. There were a total of 3 gaming sessions carried out over 3 90-minute courses in a 15-week semester. The first gaming session included a brief overview of the rules, which were explained orally, and a short lesson about some of the concepts discussed in the game, namely trade relations, stressed trade relations as influenced by the game mechanics, negotiation strategies, and how supply and demand influence resource value. Then, a highly guided game was played between the 4 enrolled students. The subsequent 2 gaming sessions included pre-game instruction, discussion of the same topics of trade relations, stressed trade relations, negotiation strategies, and supply and demand, and then more student-driven games with instructor intervention used only to clarify unclear game mechanics were undertaken. The students really liked these gaming sessions. One student even commented, "Let's just do this for the rest of the semester." Furthermore, as the students were playing together with the instructor observing and guiding gameplay, L2 use remained high during gameplay, and the students remained on task throughout the gaming sessions. As the student quoted earlier pointed out, there was obviously the desire on the student's end to continue exploring the game. However, given the constraints of how long each game takes to play and how the course curriculum had to address other topics within the 15-week semester other than the concepts covered with Catan, it would have been difficult to allocate more than the 3 weeks devoted to gameplay. Furthermore, barring the possibility that as a result of this course, students didn't go out and buy an English language version of Catan, none of the students had a copy of the board game outside of class, and so they could not continue to explore interacting with the Catan game mechanics in English. Considering this drawback to using the board game edition of Catan in class, I decided to implement a smartphone edition of Catan to be used in English outside of class for a greater part of the semester. A free smartphone application edition of Catan, Catan Universe, was used in a business English class during the fall semester of 2019. All of the gameplay was conducted outside of class in exchange for course credit as a form of homework. The students were required to complete at least 3 gaming sessions in conjunction with post-game surveys, but they were encouraged to do more. 2 of the 4 enrolled students completed the minimum requirement of 3 gaming sessions, with the other 2 students completing 6 and 7 gaming sessions respectively. No instruction was given on how to play the game, but the students were encouraged to use the English resources such as the rule books and tutorials provided by the application. The students got progressively better at the game throughout the semester, which at least indicates that the students were interested enough in the game to improve. While 2 of the students did more work than was required of them by completing more than 3 gaming sessions, the other 2 students in the group seemed to regard the game more as the proverbial chocolate-covered broccoli, or homework dressed up to be something other than homework. One comment from a student regarding gameplay stated, "Nobody will trade with me, so it's difficult for me to win." Which brings us to the biggest difference between the board game edition and the smartphone edition of Catan. Playing with a group of classmates or otherwise people you are familiar with, as is the case with the board game, and playing with a group of anonymous strangers online, as is the case with the smartphone edition. While there is a chat feature built into the smartphone application edition of Catan that may be used for trade, it is almost never used as players can anonymously conduct trade using icons. This is not to say that the smartphone edition of Catan is not without benefits in EFL contexts, but that this feature of mostly anonymous contact fundamentally alters the dynamic of the game, as well as how each game medium may be used in an EFL context. Lastly, I would like to provide any EFL and educator implementing game-based learning curricula with an overview of the beneficial contexts as well as the potential drawbacks of board games versus smartphone applications of the same game title. First of all, board games are conducive to encouraging L2 production in smaller classes. Not only are the students already familiar with each other, but the instructor may also act to ensure that students don't fall back into their L1 during gameplay, as well as provide corrective feedback while the game is occurring. Furthermore, the instructor may utilize certain elements that naturally come up during gameplay to emphasize pedagogical topics of instruction. In the case of Catan, this may come up in the form of addressing certain negotiation strategies that are more useful than others. On the other hand, classes with larger student enrollments, board games might not be a viable medium of gameplay. While it is possible to employ multiple copies of the same board game with multiple groups of student players, opportunities to police the students' use of the L2 and to provide productive feedback and/or instruction on certain topics will be reduced. Finally, board games take up a lot of class time, so long-term engagement with the utilized game is best achieved with curricula whose main focus is on the game itself. Smartphone applications, on the other hand, at least for the case of Catan, may not be as conducive to creating opportunities for L2 production. This is primarily due to the streamlining of gameplay mechanics for fast-paced, anonymous gameplay conducted online. This also means that there are less opportunities for instructors to provide constructive feedback, both linguistically and pedagogically. It is possible for students to play with each other while utilizing the Catan Universe application, but each player must purchase the full version application, which adds a financial burden to participating in the class. For other smartphone applications used in game-based learning curricula, the cost of the game as well as games that push for in-game purchases have to be taken into account when selecting for which media is most applicable to the pedagogical goals of the course. However, smartphone applications are much more scalable than board games and are therefore arguably better suited for larger class sizes, assuming first that everyone in class has a smartphone. Furthermore, most smartphone applications, including the Catan edition, have a plethora of in-game resources such as rulebooks and tutorials in the target language. This gives the students an easy path to exercise agency over their own learning. Furthermore, the mobility afforded by smartphones allows students to reclaim lost time to participate in the lesson anytime, anywhere. Just as with any other educational resources used in class, choosing the most effective method requires careful consideration of the pedagogical goals of the course. Ultimately, there is no one-size-fits-all approach to successfully integrating games into EFL curricula, but adding the choice of game media to a carefully selected game title or genre gives instructors working in the field of game-based language teaching one more tool to create effective and motivating lessons for our students. Thank you for listening, and if you have any questions regarding this study, please contact me at the email provided here.